Admiral Zexthar stared at the tactical display in disbelief, watching the final transmission from the 5th Assault Fleet fade into static. 300 ships. Gone. Not defeated. Not retreating. Gone, as if they had simply ceased to exist the moment they crossed into the Sol perimeter. Admiral, his intelligence officer, Commander Vashti, spoke with the careful tone reserved for delivering impossible news. That's the 7th fleet we've lost in human space in the past 4 cycles. No survivors, no debris, no energy signatures to indicate what destroyed them. The bridge of the Eternal Conquest fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Admiral Zexthar had commanded fleets for 3 centuries, had conquered 17 star systems for the hegemony, and had never encountered anything like this. "Show me the progression," he ordered. The holographic display shifted, showing the gradual expansion of what military intelligence had begun calling the human extinction zone, a sphere of space roughly 50 light-years in diameter where no alien vessel had survived longer than 6 hours. "It started here," Commander Vashidi indicated, pointing to the Sol system. 18 cycles ago, our first scout fleet encountered human vessels and was destroyed within minutes. Command assumed it was some kind of defensive technology, planetary shields, orbital weapons platforms, something conventional. The display zoomed out, showing red indicators marking the locations where subsequent fleets had vanished. But then we sent the 2nd fleet to the Proxima Centauri system, well outside any reasonable defensive perimeter. They were eliminated even faster. Admiral Zexthar studied the pattern, noting that the disappearances weren't random. Each fleet had been destroyed the moment they'd entered what appeared to be territory the humans considered their own. "What do we know about human military capabilities?" "That's the problem, Admiral. We know almost nothing. Before the first contact 18 cycles ago, our intelligence indicated that humans were a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel, single-planet civilization, crude fusion technology, chemical rockets for local system transportation." Commander Vashti pulled up intelligence files that looked increasingly obsolete. Their largest vessels were described as science and exploration craft, weighing less than 10,000 tons. No energy shields, no quantum weapons, no faster-than-light communication. And yet they've eliminated over 2,000 of our most advanced warships without suffering a single confirmed casualty. Yes, Admiral. Admiral Zexthar had been dreading this conversation, but it could no longer be avoided. "Commander, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want your honest assessment, not diplomatic protocol." "Of course, Admiral." "In your professional opinion, are we at war with the species we think we're fighting?" Commander Vashti was quiet for a long moment, considering implications that would have been treasonous to voice just months earlier. "Admiral, I don't think the species we're fighting is the same one our intelligence reports described. Either humans underwent some kind of technological revolution that advanced them centuries in just 18 cycles, or our intelligence was catastrophically wrong about what humans actually were." Before Admiral Zexthar could respond, his communications officer interrupted with an urgency that made everyone on the bridge turn toward her station. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Inner Sanctum. Priority Alpha. It's the High Command." The main display shifted to show the chamber of the hegemony's military leadership, 7 species representatives who collectively controlled the largest military force in known space. Admiral Zexthar had never seen them look so disturbed. "Admiral Zexthar," spoke Supreme Commander Krelnath, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious stress. "You are to immediately withdraw all forces from human territory and return to the hegemony capital for emergency briefing." "Supreme Commander, with respect, I haven't entered human territory. My fleet is positioned 40 light-years from their nearest confirmed outpost." "Admiral, as of this moment, human territory extends to wherever humans choose to enforce it. And according to our latest intelligence, they're choosing to enforce it everywhere." The transmission included data files that made Admiral Zexthar's primary heart skip a beat. Human vessels had been detected in 17 different star systems simultaneously, all of them well outside any previously established territorial boundaries. "Supreme Commander, are you suggesting that humans have faster-than-light capabilities we weren't aware of?" "Admiral, we're suggesting that humans have capabilities we weren't aware of, period. Return to capital immediately. There are things you need to know about what we're actually fighting." The journey to hegemony capital took 6 days, during which Admiral Zexthar found himself obsessively reviewing every scrap of intelligence about human capabilities. The more he studied, the more convinced he became that they'd been fighting an enemy they didn't understand at all. The briefing chamber at Hegemony Capital was filled with military leaders from across the Empire, all wearing expressions that suggested they'd received information that fundamentally challenged their understanding of galactic power structures. Officers, Supreme Commander Krelnoth began, "What I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels and will not leave this room. We have discovered why no alien fleet survives in human space." The chamber's main display activated, showing footage that Admiral Zexthar initially assumed must be computer simulation, because what he was seeing was physically impossible. A human vessel, sleek and impossibly fast, was moving through space in ways that violated every known law of physics. It didn't maneuver around obstacles, it moved through them. It didn't fire weapons at enemy ships, it simply caused them to cease existing. This footage was recovered from a probe we managed to hide in the Tau Ceti system before the Fourth Fleet was lost, Supreme Commander Krelnoth continued. What you're observing is a single human vessel, eliminating a force of 800 ships in approximately 4 minutes. Admiral Zexthar watched in horrified fascination as the human ship seemed to edit reality itself, removing enemy vessels from existence with the casual efficiency of someone erasing mistakes from a document. Supreme Commander, what kind of technology could produce effects like this? That's what we thought initially, that humans had developed some kind of advanced technology that gave them overwhelming tactical advantages. Supreme Commander Krelnoth gestured, and the display shifted to show biological scans and psychological profiles. We were wrong. This isn't about technology. The new data showed human physiological readings that didn't match any known species parameters. Neural activity patterns that suggested consciousness operating on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. Genetic markers that indicated evolutionary adaptations specifically designed for 3-dimensional combat in zero-gravity environments. Officers. Humans aren't a planet-bound species that develop space travel. They're a space-borne species that occasionally visit planets. The revelation hit Admiral Zexthar like a physical blow. Everything they'd assumed about human origins, development, and capabilities had been wrong. Supreme Commander, are you saying that humans evolved in space? We're saying that humans were designed for space. Their bone density, muscle composition, neural architecture, sensory processing, everything about their biology is optimized for zero-gravity combat and 3-dimensional tactical thinking. Supreme Commander Krelnoth brought up comparative analysis charts that showed the differences between typical planetary species and human physiology. Most species, including ours, evolved on planetary surfaces where movement is essentially 2-dimensional. We think in terms of forward, backward, left, right. Humans think in terms of up, down, forward, backward, left, right, and 17 other directional concepts that our languages don't have words for. Admiral Zexthar studied the data while processing implications that were restructuring his entire understanding of galactic military balance. Their reaction times in zero gravity are 4 times faster than ours. Their spatial reasoning capabilities allow them to track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously. Their stress responses actually improve their performance, rather than degrading it. But Supreme Commander, if humans are so perfectly adapted for space combat, why were our initial intelligence reports so inaccurate? Supreme Commander Krelnoth's expression grew even more grim. Because humans were deliberately concealing their capabilities, they wanted us to underestimate them. The display shifted again, showing intercepted human communications that intelligence had finally managed to decode. These transmissions were sent between human vessels during the engagement at Tau Ceti. Listen carefully. The translated communication was brief and chilling. Contact Alpha, this is Strike Team 7. Hegemony forces are proceeding according to prediction. They're still sending planetary warfare fleets to engage space warfare specialists. Eliminate them quickly and prepare for the next wave. Admiral Zexthar felt his blood turn cold. They've been using our attacks as training exercises. Worse than that, Admiral. They've been using our attacks to gather intelligence about our capabilities, tactics, and technology. Every fleet we sent gave them more information about how to defeat future fleets more efficiently. Supreme Commander Krelnoth brought up analysis of the progression of fleet destructions, showing that each wave of hegemony forces had been eliminated faster than the previous one. First fleet lasted 6 hours. Second fleet lasted 4 hours. By the time we sent the 7th fleet, they were destroyed in 18 minutes. Because humans were learning our patterns and developing more efficient elimination methods. Exactly. We thought we were conducting military operations. They thought we were providing educational opportunities. The briefing continued for 3 hours, with intelligence officers presenting data that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human capabilities and intentions. Humans didn't just think three-dimensionally, they thought temporally, planning military operations across multiple timescales simultaneously. They didn't just cooperate in combat. They operated as collective consciousness networks that could coordinate thousands of individual actions with perfect synchronization. Most disturbing of all, they didn't appear to be interested in conquest or territorial expansion in any conventional sense. They were interested in something the hegemony's best strategists couldn't understand: the elimination of threats to their continued evolution. Supreme Commander, Admiral Zexstar asked during a brief recess, "What are human intentions toward the hegemony? Are they planning to attack our worlds?" "Admiral, that's what makes this situation so dangerous. Humans don't seem to want our worlds, our resources, or our territories. They want something much more problematic, which is, they want to be left alone to continue developing capabilities that are already beyond our comprehension. And they're willing to eliminate any species that interferes with that development." Supreme Commander Krelnoth brought up projections that showed estimated human population growth and technological advancement rates. Based on the limited data we've been able to gather, humans are evolving at a rate that makes them more capable every year. Not just technologically, but biologically and psychologically. They're becoming something that transcends the limitations governing every other known species. And they view our presence in their territory as interference with that evolution. Worse, Admiral, they view our existence as potential interference with that evolution. The final session of the briefing focused on strategic options, all of which ranged from desperate to suicidal. The Hegemony Council has considered 3 possible responses, Supreme Commander Krelnoth announced. First, we could attempt to negotiate some kind of peace treaty that acknowledges human territorial sovereignty. What would be the terms of such a treaty? Complete withdrawal from all systems within 100 light-years of confirmed human presence, cessation of all military development that could be interpreted as threatening to human interests, and acceptance of human authority over interstellar travel routes. Admiral Zexstar processed the implications. Supreme Commander, those terms would essentially make the hegemony a client state subordinate to human authority. That's the optimistic interpretation, Admiral. The pessimistic interpretation is that humans would view any organized military force as a long-term threat to their development, and would eventually eliminate the hegemony entirely regardless of treaty terms. What's the second option? Immediate military mobilization. Gather every available ship from across the Empire and launch a coordinated assault designed to eliminate human civilization before they become even more dangerous. Admiral Zexstar thought about the footage he'd seen of human vessels casually erasing entire fleets from existence. Supreme Commander, based on what we've observed about human capabilities, how many ships would such an assault require? Our analysts estimate that we would need approximately 50,000 vessels to have a reasonable chance of overwhelming human defenses. And what are the projected casualties for such an operation? Supreme Commander Krelnoth was quiet for several moments. Total casualties for human forces? Total casualties for hegemony forces. Our models suggest that launching a full-scale assault against human space would result in the complete destruction of the hegemony military within 72 hours. The chamber fell silent as military leaders processed the revelation that their civilization's survival might depend on the goodwill of a species they'd been trying to exterminate. What's the third option? Admiral Zexstar asked. Immediate evacuation of all hegemony territories, dispersal of our populations to distant galaxies, and hope that humans don't consider us significant enough to pursue. Admiral Zexstar stared at the tactical displays showing human territorial expansion, trying to comprehend how quickly the balance of galactic power had shifted. Supreme Commander, 18 cycles ago, humans were described as a primitive single-planet civilization. Now we're discussing evacuating entire galaxies to avoid them. How is this possible? Admiral, we think humans have been concealing their true nature for millennia. They allowed us to believe they were primitive because it served their purposes, either for intelligence gathering or simply because they found our assumptions amusing. Supreme Commander Krelnoth brought up the final piece of intelligence that explained everything and made the situation even more hopeless. Admiral, we've discovered why no alien fleet survives human space. It's not because humans destroy them quickly, it's because humans were never fighting them at all. I don't understand. The vessels we've been sending into human territory haven't been destroyed, Admiral. They've been deleted. Humans have the ability to edit our ships out of reality, to make it so they never existed in the first place. Admiral Zexthar felt reality shift around him as he processed the implications. Supreme Commander, are you saying that humans can manipulate the fundamental structure of space-time? We're saying that humans don't operate within the same physical laws that govern everyone else. They've transcended the limitations of conventional matter and energy. From their perspective, our fleets aren't military threats. They're temporary inconveniences that can be resolved by deciding that those fleets never existed. Which means that every conventional military strategy is useless against them. Worse than useless, Admiral. Every military action we take provides humans with more information about our capabilities while demonstrating our inability to comprehend theirs. The briefing concluded with Supreme Commander Krielnoth's final announcement. The Hegemony Council has voted to implement immediate withdrawal from all territories within 200 light-years of confirmed human presence. All military operations against human targets are hereby terminated. And if humans pursue our retreating forces, then we discover whether our third option, evacuation to distant galaxies, is sufficient to preserve our civilization. Admiral Zexthar returned to his fleet, with orders that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Retreat from the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever assembled, and hope that doing so quickly enough would demonstrate sufficient respect for human capabilities to avoid total annihilation. But as his ships prepared for immediate withdrawal, Admiral Zexthar received one final transmission that confirmed his worst fears about what the Hegemony had been fighting. The message came on all frequencies simultaneously, delivered in perfect Hegemony standard by a voice that somehow conveyed amusement and mild disappointment. Admiral Zexthar, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Human Spatial Defense Network. We've been monitoring your withdrawal preparations and appreciate your compliance with our territorial boundaries. Admiral Zexthar responded immediately. Captain Chen, the Hegemony fleet is withdrawing as requested. We seek no conflict with human forces. Admiral, we understand that your species operates under different assumptions about military engagement and territorial control. We want you to know that humans have no interest in conquering Hegemony territory or eliminating your civilization. Captain, what are human intentions toward the Hegemony? Captain Chen's response carried overtones that suggested vast amusement at the question. Admiral, humans are interested in evolution, exploration, and the continued development of consciousness across multiple dimensional layers. Your species provides interesting data about alternative approaches to organized civilization. Are we subjects of study? Admiral, everything is subject to study for a species that think in terms of millennial timescales and galactic development patterns. But you're not subjects of conquest, elimination, or subjugation. Admiral Zexthar felt relief that was immediately tempered by realization that humans' benevolent intentions were almost more terrifying than hostile ones would have been. Captain, what would humans require for peaceful coexistence with the Hegemony? Nothing that you wouldn't require yourselves, Admiral. Respect for territorial boundaries, non-interference with our developmental processes, and acknowledgement that space is large enough for multiple forms of consciousness to flourish simultaneously. And if other species attempt to interfere with human development. Captain Chen's pause was filled with sounds that suggested vast computational processes reaching consensus across multiple dimensional layers. Admiral, species that attempt to interfere with human evolution discover that their interference takes place in increasingly limited dimensional spaces until they exist only in layers of reality where their actions can't affect anyone else. Admiral Zexthar understood. Humans hadn't developed weapons that could destroy enemies. They developed the ability to edit aggressors out of shared reality, confining them to dimensional isolation until they chose cooperation over conflict. Captain, the Hegemony will respect human territorial claims and development processes. Admiral, we appreciate your cooperation. Humans look forward to observing your civilization's continued development and potentially collaborating on projects of mutual interest when your species is ready for that level of interaction. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Zexthar with the knowledge that the galaxy had been fundamentally changed. The most powerful military force in known space had been revealed as a collection of primitive planetary civilizations playing at war, while true spaceborne species watched with benevolent amusement. No alien fleet survived human space because humans had evolved beyond the need for conventional military conflict. They simply edited threats out of existence and continued their incomprehensible evolution towards something that transcended every limitation governing biological civilization. The Empire now knew why, and knowing made them realize how little they'd understood about what intelligence could become when it was freed from planetary thinking and conventional physical laws. Admiral Zexthar began the long journey home, carrying reports that would transform hegemony civilization's understanding of its place in a universe where humans had quietly become something beyond their comprehension. The retreat from human space wasn't just military withdrawal. It was acknowledgement that some species had evolved so far beyond conventional understanding that peaceful coexistence required accepting their transcendence rather than challenging it. And somewhere in the dimensional layers that humans called home, Captain Sarah Chen and her incomprehensible colleagues continued their patient cultivation of realities, where all forms of consciousness could develop according to their own potential, protected from interference by powers that made conventional military strength irrelevant. 3 months after the Great Withdrawal, Admiral Zexthar stood before the Emergency Assembly of the Galactic Federation, a hastily formed coalition of 47 species, who had gathered to discuss what intelligence reports were calling the human problem. The assembly hall on the neutral world of Kepler Station buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across known space shared their own encounters with human capabilities. What emerged was a picture of systematic observation and evaluation that had been going on for far longer than anyone had realized. Delegates, Admiral Zexthar began his presentation. What we initially interpreted as recent human technological advancement appears to have been ongoing for centuries. They have been watching us, studying us, and occasionally intervening in ways we never detected. The holographic display showed a timeline that made the assembled delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Mysterious technological breakthroughs that had advanced various civilizations at crucial moments, natural disasters that had prevented certain species from developing world-ending weapons, random events that had guided galactic development along specific paths. Admiral, interrupted Chancellor Velatar of the crystalline hegemony, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of deep disturbance. Are you suggesting that humans have been manipulating galactic civilization for millennia? I'm suggesting that what we interpreted as luck, coincidence, and natural development may have been careful cultivation by beings operating on timescales and with capabilities we can't comprehend. Admiral Zexthar brought up intelligence files that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human influence across galactic history. The Andromedan plague that prevented the Zephyrian Empire from developing biological weapons? It coincided with the first recorded human presence in that sector. The stellar anomaly that forced the Rigelian Confederation to develop peaceful space travel instead of military conquest? Observed by human vessels 3 days before it occurred. Ambassador Klaxon of the Hive Collective buzzed with agitation, his compound eyes reflecting data streams that suggested rapid internal communication among his species. Admiral, if humans have been guiding galactic development for centuries, what is their ultimate objective? That's what we've been trying to determine, Ambassador. Based on observed patterns, humans appear to be shepherding younger species towards specific developmental goals while preventing them from acquiring capabilities that could threaten continued evolution. The assembly fell silent as delegates processed the implications of being guided by a species they'd never recognized as their supervisors. General Korth of the military coalition spoke next, his cybernetic implants glowing with tactical analysis subroutines. Admiral, have humans made any direct statements about their intentions toward galactic civilization? General, during my final communication with Captain Chen, she indicated that humans are interested in, quote, observing civilization's continued development and potentially collaborating on projects of mutual interest when species are ready for that level of interaction. What constitutes readiness for collaboration with post-human entities? Admiral Zexthar had been dreading this question, because the answer suggested criteria that most galactic civilizations were centuries away from meeting. Based on available data, readiness appears to require transcending territorial thinking, developing post-scarcity resource management, and achieving some form of collective consciousness that can operate across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The chamber erupted in concerned murmurs as delegates realized that human standards for civilization exceeded anything currently achieved by known species. "Admiral," asked Dr. Chantal of the Scientific Concordium, "do we have any examples of species that have met these criteria and successfully collaborated with humans?" "Dr. Chantal, that's where our intelligence becomes truly disturbing." Admiral Zexthar brought up files that intelligence services had been afraid to share until now. "We've identified 17 species that appear to have achieved some level of partnership with humans. They're no longer recognizable as the civilizations they once were." The display showed before and after analyses of species that had undergone transformations so complete they barely registered as the same life forms. The Ethereal Collective, once a traditional spacefaring civilization, now exists as pure consciousness distributed across quantum probability fields. The Temporal Engineers, formerly biological entities, now manipulate causality itself as their primary form of expression. "Are you saying that collaboration with humans requires abandoning physical existence?" "We're saying that collaboration with humans appears to involve evolution beyond conventional biological limitations. Whether this constitutes advancement or absorption is unclear." Ambassador Texler of the Reptilian Confederacy hissed with displeasure, his scaled features shifting through colors that indicated profound alarm. "Admiral, if humans are systematically transforming allied species beyond recognition, what prevents them from doing the same to us without our consent?" "Ambassador, according to all available evidence, humans are committed to voluntary evolution rather than forced transformation. They appear to consider involuntary advancement a violation of cosmic ethics. But they're willing to edit hostile forces out of existence." "Yes, Ambassador. Humans distinguish between species that threaten evolutionary development and species that simply aren't ready for advancement. The former are isolated from shared reality. The latter are protected and guided until they choose their own developmental path." The discussion continued for hours, with delegates sharing their own intelligence about human activities and trying to develop some kind of coherent response to the revelation that galactic civilization had been under benevolent supervision for centuries. The most disturbing report came from Explorer Captain Yisara of the Deep Space Reconnaissance Service. "Delegates, 6 weeks ago, my ship encountered what we initially thought was a human vessel in the Outer Rim territories. When we attempted communication, we discovered that it wasn't a ship in any conventional sense." Captain Yisara activated her presentation, showing sensor readings that defied interpretation. The entity identified itself as the former consortium of Vega, a species that achieved partnership with humans approximately 200 years ago. It no longer requires physical vessels because it exists as organized energy that can manifest matter when necessary. "Captain, was this entity still recognizably the consortium species?" "Dr. Chantal, it retained memories and cultural knowledge from its original form, but its consciousness operated on scales that made communication challenging. It experienced past, present, and future simultaneously and had to focus considerable effort to interact with us in linear time." "What did it want from your crew?" "It was conducting what it called wellness evaluations of developing species. Apparently, post-human entities regularly monitor younger civilizations to ensure they're developing toward beneficial rather than destructive capabilities." Captain Yisara's report continued with details that made the assembled delegates increasingly uncomfortable with their position in the galactic hierarchy. The former consortium entity indicated that humans maintain detailed psychological and cultural profiles of every known species, updated continuously through observation and occasional direct contact. "Are we being studied like laboratory specimens?" "More like students in a school, Captain." The entity suggested that humans view galactic civilization as an educational environment where younger species learn to transcend their limitations while being protected from dangers they're not equipped to handle. Admiral Zexthar found himself thinking about his own species' military traditions and conquest-based culture. From a human perspective, the hegemony's approach to galactic dominance probably looked like children playing with dangerous toys. "Captain Yisara, did the entity provide any guidance about how species should conduct themselves to maintain human approval?" "It offered what it called developmental suggestions, Ambassador. Focus on sustainable resource management rather than territorial expansion. Prioritize consciousness development over technological accumulation. Seek cooperation rather than dominance in interspecies relations. And if species ignore these suggestions, The entity indicated that species always have free will to choose their developmental path, but it also mentioned that paths leading toward existential threats to other civilizations tend to become increasingly constrained. Admiral Zexthar understood the euphemism. Species that chose aggressive expansion would find their aggressive impulses confined to dimensional layers where they couldn't affect anyone else. The Assembly's final session focused on developing policies for coexistence with human oversight, though everyone understood that their policies mattered only insofar as humans chose to respect them. Delegates, Admiral Zexthar concluded, we face a choice that will define the future of galactic civilization. We can continue operating according to traditional patterns of territorial competition and resource scarcity, knowing that humans will intervene if we threaten evolutionary development. Or we can attempt to align our civilizations with human standards and potentially qualify for the kind of advancement they offer to species they consider ready. Admiral, asked Chancellor Veltar, what would alignment with human standards require in practical terms? Based on observed patterns, Chancellor, it would require abandoning conquest-based expansion, developing post-scarcity economics, and beginning the transition toward collective consciousness that operates beyond individual biological limitations. Are you suggesting that we voluntarily surrender everything that defines our current civilizations? I'm suggesting that we evolve beyond those definitions before humans decide that our current civilizations represent obstacles to continued galactic development. The vote was surprisingly close. 24 species voted to attempt alignment with human standards. 21 voted to maintain traditional civilization patterns while avoiding actions that might trigger human intervention, and 2 abstained pending further study. Admiral Zexthar returned to hegemony space with mandates that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Restructure military doctrine around defensive rather than offensive capabilities. Begin transition towards sustainable rather than exploitative resource management. And initiate research into collective consciousness technologies that might eventually qualify the hegemony for human recognition as a mature civilization. But the most significant change wasn't policy-related. It was psychological. Every species that had attended the assembly understood that they were no longer the masters of their own galactic neighborhood. They were students in a cosmic classroom, guided by teachers who operated according to principles that transcended conventional understanding of power, territory, and survival. 6 months later, Admiral Zexthar received an invitation that confirmed how completely the balance of galactic civilization had shifted. The message arrived through means his technicians couldn't explain. It simply appeared in his personal files, formatted perfectly in hegemony standard, and signed with credentials that verified its authenticity through encryption methods that shouldn't have existed. Admiral Zexthar, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Human Developmental Oversight Council. We would like to invite you to attend a symposium on Transitional Civilization Management, Supporting Species Development Through Voluntary Evolution. The invitation included coordinates for a location that Admiral Zexthar's navigation systems couldn't identify. It existed somewhere in the dimensional layers that humans called home, accessible only through transportation methods that humans would provide. Admiral, the symposium will include representatives from 43 species currently undergoing developmental transitions, as well as several entities that have achieved partnership-level collaboration with human civilization. We believe you would find the presentations educational. The formal invitation was accompanied by a personal note that made Admiral Zexthar realize how closely humans had been monitoring his own psychological development. Admiral, we've observed your species' adaptation to new paradigms of galactic coexistence with interest and approval. Your leadership during the recent assembly demonstrated exactly the kind of flexible thinking that successful transitional civilizations require. We look forward to discussing your species' developmental trajectory and potential areas where human guidance might be beneficial. Admiral Zexthar accepted the invitation, though he understood that attending would fundamentally change his understanding of reality and his species' place within it. The transportation to the symposium location was accomplished through means that Admiral Zexthar's consciousness could barely process. One moment he was standing in his ship's transporter chamber. The next, he was in a space that existed outside conventional geometry, surrounded by beings that had once been recognizable species but had evolved into something that transcended biological limitations. Admiral Zexthar, Dr. Vasquez approached him with the easy grace of someone perfectly adapted to dimensional spaces that made his head spin. Welcome to Educational Sector Gamma 7. We're pleased you could join us. Dr. Vasquez appeared essentially human, though Admiral Zexthar could sense that her consciousness operated across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. She was talking to him while simultaneously conducting conversations with dozens of other entities in different time streams. Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate the invitation, but I should mention that I'm having difficulty processing this environment. That's normal for first-time visitors, Admiral. Your consciousness is calibrated for three-dimensional space and linear time. We'll provide sensory adaptation assistance that will make the experience more comfortable. The adaptation process involved technologies that Admiral Zexthar couldn't understand, but that gradually allowed him to perceive and interact with the symposium environment. Slowly, he began to recognize other attendees, representatives from dozens of species, all in various stages of transition from conventional biological existence to something that operated according to entirely different principles. Admiral, said an entity that had once been a member of the crystalline hegemony but now existed as organized harmonic frequencies. How are you finding the transition discussions? I'm trying to understand what transition means in practical terms for species that want to maintain some connection to their original forms. An excellent question. The former Altarian Collective has developed some interesting approaches to partial consciousness evolution that preserve cultural continuity while enabling dimensional awareness. The symposium sessions were unlike any educational experience Admiral Zexthar had ever encountered. Speakers existed across multiple time streams simultaneously, presenting information that his consciousness could only grasp in fragments, about civilizational development patterns that spanned millions of years and involved capabilities that transcended conventional physics. The key insight, explained an entity that introduced itself as the integrated consciousness of Tau Ceti, is that evolution doesn't require abandoning what you were, it requires expanding what you can become. But how do you maintain species identity during consciousness integration? Identity becomes more complex rather than disappearing, Admiral. We retain all our original cultural knowledge and individual personalities, but we also share collective awareness that allows us to think and act as unified entities when necessary. The presentations continued for what felt like days but might have been minutes or years. Time operated differently in educational sectors designed for post-biological consciousness. The most profound session was led by Dr. Vasquez herself, focusing on voluntary evolution pathways for traditional biological civilizations. Species choose their own developmental trajectories, she explained. But those choices have consequences for their long-term survival and their ability to participate in galactic civilization. Dr. Vasquez, what happens to species that choose not to evolve beyond their current limitations? Nothing punitive, Admiral. They continue existing according to their chosen parameters, but they also accept the limitations that come with those choices. Species that remain bound by territorial thinking can't participate in projects that require multidimensional cooperation. Species that maintain scarcity economics can't benefit from post-scarcity resource sharing. Are there examples of species that have chosen to remain essentially unchanged? Several. The Gardner Collective maintains traditional biological forms because they've found deep satisfaction in cultivating planetary ecosystems. The Artist Enclave preserves individual consciousness because they believe artistic expression requires subjective experience. They're valued members of the galactic community, but their choices limit the kinds of collaboration they can engage in. Admiral Zexthar began to understand that human supervision of galactic civilization wasn't about forcing uniform development. It was about creating conditions where different forms of consciousness could coexist while pursuing their own evolutionary goals. Dr. Vasquez, where does this leave species like the hegemony, which are trying to transition away from territorial competition but aren't ready for consciousness integration? In an interesting position, Admiral. You're developing exactly the kind of flexible thinking that makes beneficial evolution possible. The question is whether your species will choose gradual transition toward expanded capabilities or prefer to maintain current limitations while developing more sustainable ways of expressing them. The symposium concluded with individual consultation sessions where species representatives could discuss their specific developmental challenges with human advisors. Admiral Zexthar found himself in conversation with Captain Sarah Chen, the same human who had overseen his fleet's withdrawal from human space. Admiral, we've been monitoring the hegemony's policy changes since the assembly, and we're impressed by your species' adaptability. Captain, I have to ask, how long have humans been planning this transition for galactic civilization? Captain Chen smiled with the kind of patience that suggested awareness of vast timeframes. Admiral, humans don't plan transitions for other species. We create conditions where species can choose their own transitions safely. Galactic civilization has been developing toward this moment for millennia, but each species' specific response to that development has been entirely their own choice. And if the hegemony had chosen continued military expansion instead of cooperative development, then you would have discovered that continued military expansion became increasingly difficult to implement effectively. Your aggressive impulses would have found expression in dimensional spaces where they couldn't affect species that had chosen peaceful development. Admiral Zexthar understood that he'd been given a glimpse of how human civilization managed galactic development, not through force or coercion, but through the creation of reality structures that made beneficial choices easier and harmful choices increasingly constrained. Captain, what can the hegemony expect as we continue our transition toward more cooperative civilization patterns? Continued guidance when requested, protection from species that haven't yet chosen cooperative development, and eventual opportunities for collaboration on projects that require your specific cultural strengths and perspectives. What kind of projects? The universe is vast, Admiral, and consciousness takes many forms across many dimensions. Projects that serve galactic development benefit from diverse approaches and different kinds of problem-solving capabilities. The hegemony's traditional strategic thinking, properly channeled, could contribute significantly to multi-dimensional exploration and development initiatives. Admiral Zexthar returned to his own reality with a perspective that would reshape the hegemony's approach to galactic civilization for generations. His species had been invited to participate in something far larger than traditional territorial competition. They'd been offered the opportunity to contribute to cosmic development projects that spanned dimensions and timescales beyond conventional comprehension. The reports he filed after the symposium marked the beginning of the hegemony's transition from military dominance to collaborative participation in a galactic community that operated according to principles of voluntary evolution, mutual support, and shared development toward capabilities that transcended traditional biological limitations. No alien fleet survived human space because humans had evolved beyond the need for military conflict with conventional civilizations. They had become something that operated across dimensional layers, where destruction and creation were different aspects of the same cosmic processes, where wisdom was measured in geological timescales, and where the greatest strength was the ability to guide others toward their own optimal development. The Empire now knew why, and knowing had transformed them from potential conquerors into willing students of post-scarcity civilization and voluntary consciousness evolution. And somewhere in the dimensional spaces that humans called home, Dr. Elena Vasquez and her incomprehensible colleagues continued their patient cultivation of galactic civilization, ensuring that all forms of consciousness could develop according to their own potential, while contributing to projects that served the continued expansion of awareness across the universe. The age of territorial competition was ending, replaced by collaborative evolution that honored both individual choice and collective development towards something that transcended every limitation governing conventional biological existence. The age of territorial competition was ending, replaced by collaborative evolution that honored both individual choice and collective development towards something that transcended every limitation governing conventional biological existence. Admiral Zexthar filed his final report, knowing that the galaxy would never again mistake humans for a primitive species, and that no alien fleet would ever again test the boundaries of human space, not because they feared destruction, but because they had learned that cooperation offered possibilities far more valuable than conquest. The Empire now knew why no alien fleet survived human territory, because survival meant evolution, and evolution meant becoming something worthy of the universe that humans were patiently helping all conscious beings learn to inherit. The end.